8th grade math, part 2. Things went back to normal for the next few weeks. It wasn't until the first week of December that things got crazy again. Christmas break was coming up, and none of the students took things that seriously since we were about to have time off. It wasn't uncommon for students to bring Game Boys to school. None of the teachers cared if we played with them at lunch, as long as they were kept out of sight during class. Well, like I said, Mr. Pedersen was often late for his own class. Well, on this particular day, Jamal got sick of standing around and decided to pull out his Game Boy. When Mr. Pedersen did eventually show up, he confiscated the Game Boy and put it in his desk. Now, this wasn't unusual, but normally, if a teacher confiscated something, they would give it back at the end of the day. Jamal and I both walked to school, since we both lived pretty close together. I waited at the school, knowing he'd take a little longer than usual, since he needed to get his Game Boy back from Mr. Pedersen. When he finally showed up, he didn't have it. He was livid, saying Mr. Pedersen refused to give the Game Boy back until one of Jamal's parents came to get it. As we walked home together, Jamal and I came up with an idea. He didn't want to get in trouble with his dad, so we decided that the next day, as class was ending and everyone was leaving, I would pretend to fall and fake an injury in the hopes of luring Mr. Pedersen out of the trailer so that Jamal could retrieve his Game Boy from his desk. We figured since it belonged to Jamal, it wasn't stealing. So when the next day came, we went with the plan. I was in drama class, so I'd learned how to fall on cue. I thought everything went well. Mr. Pedersen did come over to check on me, and I kept him distracted until I saw Jamal come out and give me the thumbs up. I even got to go to the nurse and miss part of my boring history class. We thought we had pulled a fast one, but after school, as we were walking home and talking, that's when the first really weird stuff happened. First I tripped and fell for real, and I dislocated my knee, the same knee where I'd faked the injury. I can't even describe the pain. If you've never dislocated a joint before, well, you're fortunate. Jamal panicked and ran to get help, and that's when he fell. He wasn't hurt, but he did land so that the pocket with his Game Boy in, it ended up underneath him. The screen got cracked, and while it still worked, the picture was all screwed up. I ended up having to hobble home with an arm around Jamal's shoulders for support. Not going to lie, I was crying at this point from the pain, and that's when I saw it. On the street was an old pickup, and in the driver's seat was Pedersen. He was parked in front of someone's house, just watching us with that same cold seething he had the day in class after Brittany's mum yelled at him. At the time I was more afraid of the fact that he might have saw us with the Game Boy. I mean, while we might not have considered it stealing, the principal probably would have thought differently, and I didn't want to be expelled. Looking back, I wish I was. Maybe then I could have avoided the rest of it. I stayed home the rest of the week because of my knee. My dad wanted me to go anyway, and play through the pain. My mum thought it was best for me to stay home and rest. I did talk to Jamal though, and he told me that Mr. Pedersen didn't even mention the Game Boy missing, or that he'd seen us with it. I thought that was strange, but maybe he decided we got our punishment from karma. After all, I really had injured myself like I pretended to, and Jamal's Game Boy was now broken. Nothing happened when I went back to school, aside from the usual stuff. Pedersen got angry over nothing, and Jamal and I both spent a lot of time at the principal's office. Over Christmas break, I got a call from Bethany, which really surprised me. Although we were friends, her mother had died back in November, and she hadn't been back to school since. She asked if I could get Jamal and come over to her house. I'd only ever been there once before, at her birthday party back in elementary school, but I told her we'd be there. So I got Jamal and we rode our bikes down there. I remember when we knocked on her door, she looked terrible. It was obvious she had been crying a lot, but she looked thinner too, like she hadn't eaten. Her eyes had dark circles, and I had a feeling she hadn't slept either. She also had a scar visible on her shoulder. She ushered us into the house quickly and took us to her bedroom. She told us to sit down, and then she asked about Pedersen. She asked if he had been unusual or if anything weird happened. I told her about the Game Boy incident and how we'd seen Pedersen when we both fell. Her face turned white and she started muttering under her breath. I was pretty creeped out by this point. I asked her what was wrong, and that's when she told me about the car accident. Just before her mother swerved off the road and hit the telephone, she swore she heard Pedersen's voice. She said it was him yelling, and that in the same moment he yelled, her mother hit the pole. Basically, she said Pedersen caused the accident. I didn't know what to think. On one hand, it sounded crazy. It didn't make sense. And Bethany had been injured and was going through the death of a loved one. But on the other hand, I couldn't help but think about how, when Jamal and I both fell within less than a minute of each other, Pedersen had drove by. I wasn't sure what to say, but Jamal asked her when the accident actually happened, and if it was possible Pedersen had been driving by then. I guess he was remembering what happened to us too, and that's when Bethany told us something I hadn't known. I knew the accident had happened the same day that her mother had come to school. What I didn't know was that it happened on the way home just minutes after her mum yelled at Pedersen. During the same time that Pedersen was just sitting there in the classroom with that cold, seething look on his face, not saying a word to anyone. I went home not long after that. Bethany told me to watch out for Pedersen, that he had caused all of it. I don't know how that would be possible, and then I didn't know what to think. Okay, this is getting really long, so I'm going to leave it here. I'll do the third part soon.